Daughter was 7 years old when she started sleeping with the light on. I didn't think much of it. Kids go through phases. That's what I told myself. That's what I kept telling myself for longer than I should have. I work the early shift at a paper mill outside Sudbury, 4:30 in the morning until early afternoon, so by the time I get home most days I'm running on fumes and Tim Hortons. My wife handled the school run, the dinners, the homework, all of it. I was the paycheck. That was the arrangement, and I'm not proud of how easily I accepted it. Her sister moved in with us about 2 years before everything happened. Her name was Patrice. She'd had a rough stretch, a breakup, some money trouble, and my wife said it would only be for a few months. I liked Patrice well enough. She was quiet, helpful around the house, good with our daughter Maisie. Or so I thought. The house we were renting was an older place on the outskirts of town, a 2-story with a finished basement in one of those narrow crawl spaces that runs under the back addition. The landlord had done some renovations before we moved in. New drywall in the basement, fresh paint everywhere, the kind of cleanup that makes a place look better than it is. I remember thinking the baseboards didn't quite match. I remember thinking the smell in the utility room was a little off, like something left behind a wall too long. I filed both thoughts away and forgot about them. Maisie started having nightmares around October. She'd wake up crying, sometimes twice a night, and when I'd go in, she'd grab my arm and say she heard things. Sounds, she said, like someone moving around, not upstairs, not outside, inside the walls. I'd sit with her until she fell back asleep, and then I'd stand in the hallway and listen. Nothing. The house settling. Wind off Georgian Bay. I told my wife we should get her in to see someone, maybe a child psychologist, because these weren't ordinary nightmares. She was scared during the day too. Clingy in a way she'd never been before. My wife said Maisie was fine. She said it was the new school, the new neighborhood. Adjustment. Kids adjust. Give it time. Patrice said the same thing. I gave it time. One Thursday in late February, I came home early. A pipe had burst at the mill, sent half the floor home by noon. I was tired, and my chest was tight. I thought I was getting sick, and I was right. I had a fever by midnight. But when I pulled into the driveway around 12:30, I noticed something that stopped me in the car for a full minute. The lights in the basement were off. That shouldn't have meant anything. But Maisie's school didn't let out until 3:15, and my wife had texted me that morning to say she and Patrice were taking her to Costco after pickup. The house was supposed to be empty until 4 at the earliest. I sat there with the engine off, and I don't know why, but I felt something in my chest that wasn't the fever, a particular kind of cold. I went inside. I stood in the kitchen and listened. Nothing. I told myself I was being stupid. I poured a glass of water and drank half of it, and then I heard it. A sound from below the kitchen floor? Not a thump, not the pipes. It was a slow, deliberate drag, like something being pulled across concrete. I stood completely still. I waited. It came again. I opened the basement door, and I went down the stairs one at a time, not turning on the light, which I cannot explain except to say that something in me did not want to announce myself. At the bottom, I stopped. The finished part of the basement was dark and empty. The couch, the TV, Maisie's art table with the crayon marks on the edge, everything where it should be. The sound came from the utility room. I opened that door slowly. The room was cold, colder than it should have been. The furnace was fine, I could hear it running, but the far corner where the crawlspace door was, the air there was different. I could see in the dim light from the small window that the crawlspace door wasn't quite latched. A thin gap at the edge, just a few centimeters. And from inside it came a sound I have not been able to forget in 4 years. Breathing. Shallow, fast, frightened breathing. I crossed the room in 3 steps. I grabbed the crawlspace door and I yanked it open. In the thin light that spilled in from the utility room, I could see a shape pressed against the far wall of the crawlspace. Small, curled in on itself. Arms wrapped around its own knees. I said, I don't know what I said. I think I said hello, which seems absurd now. My voice came out wrong. The shape moved. A face turned toward me. My daughter. She was wearing her school clothes from that morning. Her hands were zip-tied in front of her, one of those heavy-duty orange ones, the kind I had a box of in the garage. There was a strip of packing tape across her mouth, but one corner had come loose, peeling away from her cheek, which is the only reason she was able to make any sound at all. Her hair was matted to her forehead. Her eyes, when they found mine, didn't look like a child's eyes. They looked like something older than she should ever have to be. I don't know how I got her out of there without hurting her. I was shaking so badly I could barely manage the zip tie. I ended up getting kitchen scissors from upstairs. I peeled the tape off as slowly as I could. She didn't cry when I did it. She just sat on the utility room floor and let me work. And when it was done, she looked up at me and said, "Daddy, don't look at the wall behind the furnace." I looked. The drywall there was different from the rest. Newer, whiter. Someone had painted over it recently. I could smell it, that faint chemical smell I'd noticed when we first moved in and filed away and forgot. I pressed my palm flat against it, and it sounded hollow in a way that the rest of the wall didn't. I said, "Maisie, who did this to you?" She looked down at her hands. The marks from the zip tie were still there, red and raw. She said, "Auntie Patrice told me it was a game. She said I had to wait and not make noise and then you'd come find me and I'd win. She said if I made noise, I'd lose and bad things would happen to our dog." She said it so quietly, so matter-of-factly, the way children report things they've been told to believe. I had to sit down on the floor next to her because my legs stopped working. She'd been down there since 9 in the morning, over 3 hours. I called 911. While I waited, I held Maisie on my lap and I talked to her and I gave her the glass of water I'd been carrying since I came downstairs, and she drank all of it in one go, both hands wrapped around the glass. I kept talking. I kept my voice steady. I don't know how. The officer who arrived first was a woman named Sergeant Beliveau, maybe 40, short hair going gray at the temples. She came in, assessed Maisie, called for paramedics, and then she looked at me and said, "What's behind that wall?" Because I hadn't even gotten to that part yet. I just said my daughter had been found in the crawlspace. Sergeant Beliveau was the one who noticed the paint smell. They brought in someone from the OPP Major Crime Unit within an hour. The drywall came down late that afternoon. Inside the space behind the furnace wall, which was not part of the original crawl space, but had been walled off from it, the landlord confirmed he had not created it. That section of drywall had been installed after we moved in. They found a plastic storage bin. Inside the bin were items that I can only describe in pieces because even now I cannot hold the whole picture in my head at once. A child's sneaker. A pink hair elastic. A school photograph of a girl I didn't recognize, maybe 9 or 10 years old, her name written on the back in pen, and a small notebook with entries in handwriting I recognized. My wife's handwriting. The investigator who spoke to me that night, a quiet man named Constable Draper, sat with me in my kitchen for a long time. He explained things slowly, carefully. The way you explain something to a person you're worried might not hold together. He told me that the items in the bin were consistent with evidence from an unsolved case out of Sault Ste. Marie from 6 years earlier. A child who had gone missing from a foster arrangement, never found. He told me my wife and her sister had lived in Sault Ste. Marie 6 years ago. He told me there were 2 other names in the notebook. I went into the backyard after he said that. I stood in the snow in my work socks and I stayed there until the cold went through me entirely, until I stopped feeling it, and I don't know how long that was. My wife and Patrice were picked up at the Costco parking lot. My daughter had been missing from that space for over 4 hours and they had driven 40 minutes north to buy groceries. I try not to think about that too hard. The weeks that followed are not something I can describe in any linear way. There were interviews and a family advocate through Children's Aid and a trauma counselor for Maisie, a woman who drove up from Barrie twice a week and who Maisie started calling Miss Amanda within the first session, which made me feel for the first time in that whole stretch of time, like my daughter might be okay. My mother drove in from Timmins and stayed for 6 weeks. She slept on the couch and she made soup every day, big batches of chicken soup like she used to make when I was sick as a kid, and she didn't press me to talk when I didn't want to. I don't think I've ever been more grateful to another person in my life. I moved us out of that house within 3 weeks. We're in a different part of Sudbury now, a small townhouse near the school Maisie was already attending, so I didn't have to pull her out and make her start over again somewhere new. The property manager let me out of the lease without a fight when the police involvement became clear. I don't know that I could have won that battle if it had come to one, but it didn't. The case moved slowly, the way cases do. My wife retained a lawyer through legal aid. There was a bail hearing and then a series of delays and then a preliminary inquiry, and the whole thing ground through the system over 18 months before the trial date was set. I sat through most of it. I had to. What came out during disclosure, and I'm telling you only the part I can bring myself to say out loud, was that Patrice had started what they were calling a pattern of behavior with children several years before she moved in with us. My wife had known. Not later, not after the fact. She had known and she had covered it, and in at least one case, she had actively participated. The girl in the photograph was real. She had been real. She did not go home. I keep thinking about the night Maisie told me she heard things inside the walls. I keep thinking about all the times I lay there in the dark listening and heard nothing. I keep thinking about how many times my daughter came to stand in my doorway at 3 in the morning and I walked her back to bed and said it was just the house settling, just the wind, just her imagination. She wasn't imagining anything. I'm not going to tell you I've made peace with that. I don't think peace is the right word for something you just learn to carry. What I will tell you is this. Maisie is 9 now. She has 2 best friends and a rescue mutt named Biscuit that she dresses in tiny sweaters. She picks out herself at Value Village. She still sleeps with a lamp on, but she sleeps. She knows she can come wake me for any reason at any hour, and I will come every time without complaint. We have renegotiated that understanding between us, and I intend to honor it for the rest of my life. She told me once, about 6 months after everything, that she knew I would come. She said she heard my car in the driveway, and she started scratching at the crawlspace door because she knew I would hear something a knock wouldn't make. She thought the drag sound would carry through the floor into the kitchen. She was 7 years old and she worked that out on her own, in the dark, after 3 hours. I did not deserve that faith, but I have it and I will spend whatever time I have left trying to be worth it. The person you smile at across the dinner table, the person who picks your child up from school, the person who says, without blinking, that everything is fine. You cannot always know. But you can listen when children tell you something is wrong. You can refuse to file it away. You can decide before something forces your hand that your child's fear is worth more than your comfort. I came home early that day because a pipe burst. I have thought about that pipe every single day since. There's a version of that Thursday where the pipe at the mill doesn't burst, where I finish my shift, drive home at the usual time, walk in the door at 2:15, and Maisie is still in that crawl space when my wife and her sister get back from Costco. I think about that version a lot. I think about it the way you press on a bruise, not because it feels good, but because you need to know it's still real. What happened to us didn't happen because of bad luck. It happened because I had spent years choosing comfort over attention. Not cruel comfort, not lazy comfort, the ordinary kind. The kind where you tell yourself your partner has things handled, where you file away the smell behind the wall and the mismatched baseboards and your daughter standing in the doorway at 3 in the morning, and you go back to sleep because you're tired and because nothing bad has happened yet. That yet is where the damage lives. Maisie knew something was wrong long before I did. She is 7 years old, and she knew. She came to me with it in the only language she had: nightmares, clinginess. The light left on, and I translated all of it into adjustment, into phase, into give it time. I was not a bad father in any way I could have pointed to back then. I was just absent in a specific way that looks exactly like presence. What I understand now, sitting on the other side of it, is that paying attention is not passive. It is a choice you make actively, every day, even when you are exhausted and the mortgage is due and the mill starts at 4:30 in the morning. It requires a kind of honesty with yourself that is genuinely uncomfortable. The honesty that says, my child is afraid, and I do not actually know why, and that matters more than my need to believe everything is fine. That honesty is not something you either have or you don't. It is something you build or something you fail to build, one small decision at a time. Maisie built it. At 7, in the dark, zip-tied and alone, she worked out how to make a sound that would carry through the floor and reach me. She didn't panic. She didn't give up. She waited, and she listened. And when she heard my car, she acted. That is not something she was born with. That is something that had been growing in her quietly the whole time. I thought she was just going through a phase, a kind of inner steadiness that no one had put there on purpose, least of all me, but that held her together when everything else had failed her. I owe her more than I can calculate. What I try to do now, badly, imperfectly, some days better than others, is to be the kind of person who deserves to be trusted. Not because I'm afraid of what happens if I'm not, but because Maisie decided, in the worst moment of her life, that I was worth making a sound for. She made that decision before I'd earned it. I am still, every day, trying to catch up to it. The people who hurt her made their choices too, a long series of them stretching back years, each one a little easier than the last, because the one before it had gone unpunished. That's how it works. Not fate, not darkness, not something written somewhere. Just choices, and the weight they accumulate. Patrice and my wife did not become who they were overnight, and I did not become someone who stops hearing his daughter overnight either. We were all in our different ways, the sum of what we'd been willing to do and willing to ignore. I choose differently now. That's all I've got. That's the whole of it.